Hello you, my name's Jamie and I was adopted. I grew up with 3 older adopted siblings. Yes, I was the youngest. The oldest is my brother and we have 2 sisters between us. The one right above me in age was also adopted, just from a different family. So I'm not genetically related to any of my siblings or anyone in my family. Now my birth mother was originally from Illinois. But I was born and raised in Iowa. Now I lived with my birth mom until I was about 6 months old, and then things started to get kind of hard for her and she realized that she couldn't give me the life that she wanted for me. I was then put into foster care and was actually immediately put with a family that ultimately ended up adopting me. I was their foster child for about a year and a half before I was officially adopted. So even though I was technically in foster care, I was in it for such a short amount of time, I don't even remember it. And it was the only foster home I had been in, and considering they just ended up adopting me, I really don't acknowledge or say that I was in foster care when people find out that I was adopted and ask me about it, just because it was such a small portion of my life that I was too young to remember. The same thing also happened to the other girl in my home who was adopted. She was just about a year old, I think, when she was given up and came to the family. They were her first and only foster family as well. Growing up, I always knew that I was adopted, even if I didn't actually know what being adopted meant. Like, I was too young to understand what adoption was. But that also meant that my older siblings knew I was adopted as well and would kind of use that in arguments, reminding my sister and I that we weren't really part of the family whenever we would kind of get into arguments or annoy each other generally. Now, my adopted mother would always shut that shit right down. She would always say, well, we gotta choose you. We were stuck with them. I'll be truthful, that kind of always made me feel good. Don't take that to mean I had a bad relationship with my siblings. We were just bratty little kids, and with 4 kids, all 2 years apart from each other, there's bound to be arguing and fighting, and we were kids. As for the reason my adopted parents decided to adopt, my adoptive mother, Mary, had a lot of fertility issues. Her and my adopted dad, Brian, were able to have 2 genetic children, my 2 oldest siblings. Unfortunately though, before they were able to have them, they did suffer a miscarriage before she was able to carry my 2 older siblings to term. This is actually something her and I have kind of bonded over, because I suffered a miscarriage and about 2 years later had a stillbirth. That's a whole nother video. She wasn't able to have any more children after my oldest sister was born because of too many complications, and ended up actually having to have a hysterectomy, so adoption was really their only viable option. But my adopted parents, Mary and Brian, wanted more kids, so they started with foster care. So that's kind of how they ended up adopting my older sister and I, and kind of why. Now, my adoption and my sister's adoption were what's considered a closed adoption, where I cannot legally have any contact with my birth mother until I'm 18, and vice versa. She's unable or not allowed to contact me either. I think that a part of this was because my birth mother, Jessie, actually ended up changing her mind and wanting to get me back. And this ended up in a huge legal battle that ended up going all the way to the Iowa Supreme Court. Obviously, my adopted parents, Mary and Brian, won. But however, despite all of that, Jessie and I, my birth mother, ended up actually meeting when I was 16, so 2 years before we were technically supposed to. And this was just kind of a chance surprise encounter for both of us. My first and current job is at a restaurant that's inside of a casino. At the time, I was bussing tables, like cleaning them off, and running room service as well. And that's where I kind of just happened to meet my birth mother, Jessie. Let me just preface this by saying I did kind of have an idea of what she looked like. With my adopted mother's permission, I looked her up on Facebook, and there was one really kind of bad, grainy, dark, out of focus picture of her on her Facebook page. So it wasn't the best example to go off of, but apparently it was enough for me to be able to recognize her when I saw her in person. Maybe 6 or 8 months later, I'd say. Now, I didn't notice her and her wife come into the restaurant. The host gave them their seat and everything. I must have been in the kitchen or something like that. But I remember walking out to go up to the host stand to kind of chat with my coworkers. It was a pretty slow Saturday night. And I got a glimpse of her out of the corner of my eye. My heart started pounding, and I just ran back to the service station by the kitchen and just chugged the glass of water that I had and tried to like calm down because I wasn't really sure what was going on. She just looked really familiar to me, and I just kind of almost started panicking. So I kind of calmed myself down, and I walked back out up to the host stand, which would mean I was walking past her. And I kind of like kept looking over and everything, trying to make sure I was seeing what I thought I was seeing. And I walked up to the host stand, and I must have looked weird because he kind of looked at me and asked if I was okay. And I kind of just looked at him and I'm like, I think I'm going crazy. And he kind of laughed and said, probably, but go ahead. And I said, I think my birth mom's sitting over in that booth. And he kind of glanced over and then kind of looked at me, and he's like, yeah, you're going crazy. And I just kind of dead ass looked him in the eye and was like, I'm gonna go ask her. I'm gonna go talk to her. And I'm not really sure what he said, if he said anything, because I just kind of turned around and was determined to go speak to this woman who, for all I knew, could just be some random woman that I was just gonna go royally confuse and ruin her dinner. So as I approached my birth mom and her wife, they were talking, and I kind of pretended to kind of look at our Christmas tree we had up, waiting for like a natural break in their conversation. Side note, I met my birth mom on 12/13/14, so December 13th, 2014. I just think that's kind of cool. But anyway, so that's why we had a Christmas tree up, because it was around Christmas. So I was pretending to look at that, like, oh yeah, look at all the decorations and everything. And when there was kind of a break in their conversation, I walked over to their table. And I just kind of looked at her and I was like, hi, I'm sorry, I really don't mean to bug you, or like, whatever. You just look like someone I know. Can I ask, is your name Jessie? And she kind of looked at me like, okay, weirdo, whatever. But she said yes, kind of like hesitant. And I kind of started getting a little bit more excited. Like my heart started pounding again. And I was like, Jessie blank, and I asked what her last name was. And this time she kind of just looked at me and looked back at her wife, and with a lot more hesitation, this time just kind of went, yes. And then I just kind of blurted out, I'm like, and you gave away a little girl when you were younger? And this time she didn't say anything. Her wife did. Her wife looked me in the eye and just said, Jamie. And my dumbass forgot that I was wearing a name tag. And I'm thinking, oh my god, how does she know my name? This must be them. I'm like, bitch, you're wearing a name tag. And I was like, yeah, like, how did you know? And she looked back at my mom and said, Jessie, that's your daughter. That's Jamie. And my mom was still kind of trying to process it. She kind of just kept looking back and forth between the two of us, just utterly confused and shocked. I mean, as you would expect in this type of situation. But once she realized who I was, she just shot up from her chair and hugged me as tight as possible. And she just kept saying, like, my baby girl, and everything. And we both started crying. And even though it was a pretty slow night, there were still people in the restaurant, and they were all kind of looking at us like, what the fuck? And I just kept thinking, like, shut up, like, let me have my moment. And it was definitely like a Hallmark movie moment type, like, this stuff only happens in the movies type. I remember thinking, like, you need to remember this moment, like, this is like a huge thing. And I remember seeing the host that I talked to earlier just run back to the kitchen, just like saying, like, no way, no way. So I assume he went to go tell my boss. because later I found out she already knew before I told her. After we were able to calm down for a little bit, I kind of took a deep breath. I'm like, okay, sit back down. I gotta go talk to my boss and figure out what I can do right now. It was pretty slow. I hadn't gotten a break yet. I knew I was either gonna get a break soon or be sent home. So I went up to her and she was about to turn the corner with some food. I almost ran into her because I was just like running. I was like, hi, I just met my mom for the first time. Can I take a break and go sit with her? And she kind of looked at me like, yeah, bitch, go. So we sat for a little bit and everything. But when I first came back, my mom kind of looked at me weird and I was a little bit confused. I'm like, yeah, what's wrong? And she's like, you can talk. And I kind of looked at her like, yes, I can talk. And her wife looked at me and she said, you're not deaf? And I was like, what? Deaf? What do you mean deaf? You're deaf, right? And I'm like, no, I'm perfectly hearing, maybe selectively, but I'm perfectly hearing. And she said that all these years she was told I was deaf, and that was one of the reasons that she gave me up. I guess I was just a little slow developmentally when I was little and didn't react to sound. And I later found out that this was something my adopted parents thought as well when they first got me. Everyone just thought I was deaf. I just didn't care when people talked to me or anything. So that was kind of one of the reasons that she was hesitant and confused as to how I knew all this information, and really wasn't sure that I was her daughter because I was speaking to her and asking her questions and could obviously hear her response. So that was kind of interesting. But I will say a lot of the information that at least I got from her in my adoption records was wrong. They said that she was like born in France and all this other stuff. She was not. She's the most American person from the Midwest, like, that you'd ever meet. So a lot of my information was wrong. A lot of her information was wrong about me, and it just kind of, my whole adoption process was kind of a mess. I might end up making a whole video on that in and of itself someday, because that needs a lot of explaining. So after a while of talking, my boss came up and she handed me the tips that I had earned from the night, told me to go clock out. I did. I ran straight back to the table to talk to my mom some more. Kind of just general, like, getting to know you type stuff, catching up, everything like that. She told me that this was her girlfriend at the time, and she seemed a little hesitant to tell me, and I'm like, oh girl, no, I'm bi, like, that's fine. We sat there and talked for a while. I think we ended up meeting around 9:30, 10 at night, and we stayed there and talked until the last table left, which was about 1:30 in the morning. Our restaurant closes at 1, but we don't really kick people out, so we left when the last table left because we didn't want to keep them any longer. But if someone was already there, we were gonna stay. We made a plan for us to meet the next morning after my shift at work. I usually got off at like 1 p.m. the next day. So they came back and everything, and we had a nice lunch, and they brought all the baby pictures that they had of me for the first 6 months of life. I was still in a lot of shock, even the next day, of, did this actually happen? Did I really meet her? So technically I don't think that was breaking any rules, because I was 2 years younger than I was supposed to be, but it was purely by chance. I did end up telling my parents the next day, my adopted parents. They understandably were not happy, but they did let me continue to have a relationship with her and everything, and we still talk today. We live about an hour away from each other, so we aren't as close as I would like us to be, but we do still have a fairly good relationship. So that's really all there is to this story. It was definitely a very interesting, very unexpected from her Facebook page that I had looked up before I met her, it said that she still lived in Illinois, so I definitely wasn't expecting her to be in Iowa. And she had no idea where I was or if my name was still the same. My adopted parents didn't change my first name when I was adopted, so that's why her wife knew that my name was Jamie. I was adopted in the next town over from where she gave me up, and she had apparently been living, like had moved back to that same town about 6 months before I met her. She had moved back to Illinois as I grew up and then moved back to the same town that she gave me up in. So for a while before I met her, she lived about 20 minutes away from me, and I had no idea. So now I see her all the time. She comes into the casino and into my work, and the second I see her, I'm like, Mom, like, that's really the only time I get to see her. I live 30 minutes north of my work and she lives 30 minutes south of my work, so it's kind of a good middle ground if she ever wants to see me or anything. She pretty much knows my schedule. I kind of work the same thing every day, so she'll just come and visit me while I'm at work. That's pretty much the only time I get to see her. But anyway, that was the story of how I met my birth mother, how and why I was adopted and everything. Kind of a little bit about how I grew up. I have plenty of other story times set up, lined up. So, my name's Jamie. I have no idea what I'm doing with my life. Right now, I'm gonna go to bed because it is 1:17 in the morning. So, good night.